Hey. Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Valdez. I'm with IPX 1031, and we are part of the Fidelity National Financial Group, and that is not always known. We're the 1031 company, the exclusive 1031 company, and we work with our sister companies, Chicago Title, Ticor Title, and Fidelity Title here in Washington. So that's good to know as well. They're very well versed in 1031 exchanges as my partner, and of course I'll work with any title company. There's no issues there. So anyway, we just last year in 2024 won an award for the best 1031 company in the nation. We're probably the leaders, and I like to start with talking about being part of the Fidelity family because that just offers credibility and then insurance on every transaction. We insure up to $180 million per transaction. And because of our relationships as Fidelity's commercial relationships, we move money quickly and we have great relationships with the top banks. That's where we put our clients' proceeds when we become their qualified intermediary. And it's very important to also, and I'll reiterate this as we jump into the process, that these days, people are choosing companies that are secure. And we are definitely secure. We do DocuSign for everything. We have that insurance on every transaction. And we also segregate. Hello, Pablo. We also segregate proceeds per the tax attached to the taxpayer. So some 1031 companies are commingling funds. And when you commingle funds, that's scary, right? Because then when the client goes, "Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Welcome. Thank you for joining." So we're talking about 1031 exchanges. We're part of the Fidelity National family. I was explaining that we're the 1031 company under the Fidelity umbrella. Very secure, billions in dollars every year in transactions. We hold it in the top banks. We become the qualified intermediary. So by just all of you responding, you put up your hand. Michael, you can chime in. Has anyone done a 1031 exchange with their clients before? Okay, so do you have the
No,
basics down? No, okay.
no.
So so jumping into kind of the background, and now we'll jump into what a 1031 is. A 1031 exchange allows an investor to take a property that's considered, sorry guys, considered an investment property and take the net proceeds, which are anything after closing costs, which would be commissions and state local taxes. Anything after that would be the net proceeds. They would take that money and put it into a new purchase of a new investment property. And by doing so and meeting certain criteria, they have the ability to defer capital gains taxes. And of course, that's what our main goal is. Every time I jump on with a client, if they don't already understand how to figure out capital gains is basically your basis, which is what you bought the property for, and the difference in what you sell. And that is gains. And that's all we really care about in the 1031 world. And so it's not about equity. It's not about what you owe on the property. It's about the net sales price will be the determining number of what you want to buy into an equal or greater value in the replacement property in order to have 100% deferment. And in doing so, not only do you want to buy into equal or greater value, the other rules are there's got to be the same taxpayer that holds title on the relinquished property would be the same taxpayer that holds title on the replacement property. Also, you can sell up to 3 properties, 1, 2, 3 more if you want, and put them all into one larger property. You can sell one larger property. I have a lot of clients doing that right now and maybe going to different states and buying 2 properties. And then there's another place to put proceeds, which I'll talk about at the end as well in trending topics. So basically, we become the qualified intermediary, the third party. And what we do is we work with escrow and title on the closing of the property being sold and or purchased. And we receive proceeds, we hold proceeds. And then when the client finds the replacement property, we would work with escrow and title on getting proceeds back. So there are a few rules. The same taxpayer rule is one of the rules, buying into equal or greater. And if you don't buy into equal or greater, there's no penalty, but the difference is called boot and would be subject to taxes. So if somebody sold for $1 million and bought something for 900, that 100,000 then becomes subject to tax versus their entire gain. So we try to get people to buy into at least the value of what they're accepting in proceeds. Another rule would be the timing rules. So when you close on the property that you're selling, you have 45 days as the taxpayer to identify. And this is where it's really important that you guys as brokers are on board with a 1031 transaction, because 45 days comes and goes quickly. And I know with inventory levels that it can be challenging. So as far ahead of the closing date, we can start looking for replacement properties, the best. So typically I engage a client around when they get an offer on the property they're selling, and then we have a PSA and title commitment. That's when we can set up their exchange. And then basically that anytime ahead of that actual hard closing date where escrow changes hands or title changes hands, then is extra time. But that date, if we're saying, like, for example, we'll talk about a March 1st closing, that would start the calendar then for 45 days to identify up to 3 properties up to the 45th day. So based on inventory levels, that's a working list these days. So you'd want to help your client find 3 properties potentially to buy as the replacement. And if something sells to someone else, we can add another property up to the 45th day. So I haven't had really any issues in the last several months regarding transactions that failed based on identification. I know inventory is tight. So like I said, if we can partner and collaborate with you guys understanding the essence of the timelines, then, you know, that will be best for our clients that we're collaborating on an exchange with. The next timeline is 180 days, and that's how many days you have from that same closing on the initial sale to close on the replacement property. So does that all make sense so far, the timeline? Okay, perfect. So that would be a traditional exchange. And again, they can sell one and buy two. We, as a company, have an internal staff of exchange officers that hold the client's hand through the entire process. So I want you to feel very confident when you hand them over to IPX 1031. We are taking care of everything. Part of our initial job is to review all the documents, make sure all the names line up the same way, spelling, everything, just to get ahead of any errors. And then obviously becoming the qualified intermediary, our internal team would work with escrow to set up wire. We use DocuSign, wire transfer. We use DocuSign for everything, super secure. So basically then we're holding money, and then you as the brokers would be working with the client to find those replacement properties and then try to identify. And again, our company would hold the client's hand, send out all the documentation, everything that needs to be filled out on those identification documents, and then get ready to close on the property that they move forward with. So that's kind of how the transaction works. And I'm sure you guys are all used to that and having done 1031s before. So at this point, any questions on anything? Okay, so I want to talk about a couple relevant topics. So a reverse exchange is exactly what it sounds like, and we're very active with reverses right now. A reverse is when the client buys the replacement property first and then sells the relinquished property. So I know that typically with investors, especially when they find the property that they want, they pounce on it, right? We know that. And usually capital is not an issue. You know, they have the resources, they know what they want, and maybe they just haven't sold the original property because it's tenant occupied or whatever reason. They just aren't quite ready to sell, but they're ready to buy. So then we can exercise the strategy of a reverse. And a reverse allows the client to buy first and sell second. However, the IRS will not let the client hold title to both properties during a 1031 exchange. So we then become, instead of the qualified intermediary holding proceeds, we would be the qualified intermediary accommodator to that title and hold it on behalf. We call it parking the property, and we would park the purchased property until they sold the original relinquished property, and the proceeds would then come through and reimburse. So as I said, most investors are pretty resistant to needing capital, whatever the interest rates are, et cetera, because they usually have access. If somebody doesn't have access to their own cash and they need those proceeds to pay for it, then we have a problem, because lenders typically are not lending to that scenario. So it's a little challenging if they're trying to get lending in a reverse, but we have ways around it. And then we have an exclusive reverse department that's all attorneys, and they handle the transaction for the client, and they will work with the lenders setting everything up. Now, as I explained, because the IRS will not let the client hold title to both properties, in order to hold it on the behalf of the client, then we would set up a segregated LLC during the interim until we relinquish title and they've sold the other property. And they are also able to that's part of the package of a reverse. Then they can walk away with that LLC if they want. So our cost on reverses is about $6,500 because of that structure. My cost on a regular exchange is $1,000, and that covers the sale and the purchase of the replacement property. So that's a really relevant active strategy right now. Another couple active strategies are improvement exchanges. So say you have a client that sells for $1 million and the property they find is 800. So there's that $200,000 delta that we don't want to pay taxes on. Perhaps the property needs some improvement. So then we can use that same department that executes reverses as an improvement exchange. And then in that case, we'll still hold title in the same way that I explained earlier until the improvements are made up to the 180th day we can use proceeds. So if there's like $200,000 left over and the client wants to put a fence in or maybe make some improvements on the investment property they're purchasing, then they can use the proceeds in that arena too. And that's really good to know because that adds another like sort of strategy. So I know you're going to set out to look for the $1 million property for the client, but in case you found the $800,000 and you had $1 million in proceeds from the sale, then we can use that 200 in improvements versus paying taxes on it. So that's another great strategy. There's also build to suit, but I challenge most, contractors to put up a building in 6 months from the ground up. So that's pretty challenging. But, I had somebody over in the islands barge in a 1910 house. And because the foundation needed to be poured for the house to be put on top of, it qualified for an exchange. So that was kind of like building from the ground up, and we made it happen within the 180 days. So it was a great scenario for that specific client. So there's a lot of like nuances, and that's when I would encourage any of you to reach out to me if there's any kind of like specifics. I'm always happy to strategize with your clients, to get on the phone with you and or your clients. We don't like to say no. So like some of these strategies I'm explaining really can, curtail a no if they have options. Another really great option is called our second home vacation home option. So, are you guys aware that a short-term rental like on VRBO or Airbnb would also qualify in as an investment for a 1031 exchange? If you weren't, it does. And there's certain criteria. And this is a really appealing strategy right now in this market and in certain counties of Washington because of all of our, vacation home opportunities on the water, on the lakes, et cetera. So what a vacation home, second home strategy is that the client has to rent out the property for a minimum of 14 days a year. And by doing that 14 days a year, like on Airbnb or to someone they know, and put it on, you want to also always make sure your clients are putting their investment properties on their taxes as investment properties, and all of your contracts. I have verbiage that you can always use to put in contracts regarding 1031s as well. So basically, then they can also use that home up to 14 days a year. So it's a great scenario. And typically, when we're talking about investment properties, whether you're buying one or selling, I always ask, how long have you held it? And 2 years is like the magic number, 2 tax seasons, 2 years as an investment. So if they took some proceeds, did an exchange, got a second home scenario or vacation home, for the first 2 years, they can use it up to 14 days a year. After that, they can exchange again after it's been seasoned for 2 years, and or they can just turn it into their permanent vacation home. Now, when we're talking about 1031 exchanges, you're deferring taxes. So the taxes are following each property, right? So on that vacation home now, it's been 2 years and they want to like have it just be theirs. They don't want to rent it anymore. It's already qualified itself enough per the IRS, 2 years as an investment. And they just want to make it their family home, put it in their family portfolio for the rest of their lives. Then what I recommend that client takes that property, puts it in a trust, and then puts it into generational wealth and leaves it for their heirs. And in doing so, then their heirs get a step up in basis on the day they inherit the property. It goes up to market value. So the capital gains will be gone, right? Because it's now market value, not what they bought the vacation home 20 years ago for. And the deferment that goes along with the exchanges is gone as well. So that's what I would say is the best long-term plan. We hate to talk about it because it's the ultimate strategy. Someone has to pass on for that to occur. But if they're not wanting to sell or exchange out, then I recommend you keep it to the end. And that way all those deferments go away. Otherwise, when you do sell, if you don't exchange again, then those would be attached to that new property. Does that all make sense? Okay. So yeah, I have tons of clients looking into that, and they just can't believe it when they say, I can actually go there 2 weeks a year as well. And they can also go as the owner of the investment property to put paint on the wall for a weekend or nails or whatever the case, couple nails in the wall and you're good for the weekend. You got to go outside your 14 days as well. So that's kind of, it's not breaking any rules. It's just sort of like working within the rules. But we do have horror stories. So you never want to like push a client to spend too much time there, and definitely not establish any roots for the first couple of years. Like don't go to the market every day, or, we kind of laugh because seems like common sense, but then you hear the horror stories on people being audited. And so we're always looking out for our clients in that way. So those are a couple really relevant topics right now, really relevant strategies. Again, I am always happy to jump on a call with any of your clients and talk to them. And, the people doing exchanges right now are typically landlords, and their motivation is to get into a higher producing monthly income property, something that's yielding more rental income. Or like in certain areas like Tacoma, a lot of landlords are wanting to get out of there because they've made it very tenant friendly versus landlord friendly. And the rules and the laws down there. And so, there's a lot of migration happening, a lot of people relocating, and they want their investment properties in the same state they are, the same area. Um, they're building generational wealth, kind of back to what we talked to. People want, new assets. So like kind is another rule that applies, and I think you're all familiar with it. Like kind just means investment property for investment property or professional and trade. And basically it can be a piece of land for a condo for an apartment, etc. And then another really great way, I don't know how you guys generate leads, but I know a lot of brokers are working with their title companies and getting non-owner occupied lists, farming lists, and then calling all of those, like just spending, maybe 20 calls a day trying to find out if anybody's interested in selling their investment property. Sometimes I heard just a phone call is like all you need. They haven't really made a move, but they're ready. And so that's a great way to find leads as well. And the whole idea behind a 1031 exchange is to keep the generational wealth, keep the purchasing power, keep your preserve what you've earned instead of paying taxes. And in Washington state, the average taxpayer on capital gains is paying 25 to 30%. And that's an aggregate of depreciation recapture at 25%, this income tax, which is going to either be 15 or 20, and then 3.8% Medicare. And all of that can be deferred. And if you typically add that up, the aggregate is about 25%. So if somebody bought a property 10 years ago for 500 and is selling tomorrow for $1 million, that's 500 in gains, and they could potentially be liable for up to $150,000 in taxes. So when you kind of work the numbers, it makes sense. I call it a no-brainer, and it's not for everyone because some people want to pull their cash, or just, they're willing to pay taxes because they need to cash out, or they have other, goals. But as far as building a real estate portfolio, I call it a no-brainer. If you have the intention of keeping the ball rolling down the field, if you will, then deferring is the way to go. And so with that being said, is there any questions right now? I know that we can kind of talk about what you guys are seeing out there, and then, hi, yes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So, I know Washington doesn't have state income tax,
Right.
but what if the property they're exchanging out of is in a state that does have a property tax or an income tax? Do the
Sure.
states have anything that mirrors this? Or is that, are they
It's
just
based
gonna pay
on
their?
where the taxpayer's residence is.
Okay,
So if they're a resident of Washington State, they would follow our, yeah, no state income tax. So
okay,
I do have clients exchanging, they own property here but live in other states where there is state income tax, so
right.
they would be liable for that.
The
Yes.
state income tax, okay.
Yes.
So
The
as far
state
as
they
you know,
reside in.
this, none of the states have this mirror this federal income
Attaching
1031.
it
Yeah,
to,
yeah,
yeah, no, I
yeah.
haven't heard that, but I hope not.
I went,
That's one of our benefits of living here. This is why we deal with certain other
well,
things like
I
the
thought
weather.
maybe if it was an exchange within a
Sure.
particular state,
Yeah,
maybe they would
no,
defer it or something like that. Okay,
it's solely based on the taxpayer's state of residence.
okay, gotcha.
Good question, though. Great question. So basically, some of the trends we're seeing for 2025, where there's going to be increased business, is a lot of loans are maturing. Have you guys heard about that? A lot of those loans from 5 years ago and 10 are maturing now this year. Have you guys heard of also the silver tsunami? Yeah. So silver tsunami is the baby boomer generation a lot. They're predicting, like millions of homes coming on the market in the next decade based on the silver tsunami, people moving out of their primaries. So that's going to be great for all of us. Some other shifts in asset classes. I think people are really, this is going to be a big year for investors. Again, coming back to interest rates and sort of some of those loans maturing. We also can combine seller financing with a 1031 exchange. There's like, we can hold the note, and because in seller financing, then typically the proceeds are not available, right? Because the seller is financing and holding note. So we can still combine a seller financing scenario though with a 1031 exchange. So that's an option as well. And we're seeing that's probably going to be a little more relevant this year too, as people are becoming more creative. And so that's another trend. What are you guys seeing? I'm also, obviously we're all praying the interest rates go down. And I think, a lot of the corporations are mandating back to work. And I know that we saw some activity based on that a couple years ago. So I know like in downtown, a lot of condos and apartments, they're looking to that will be filled probably in the next couple years again. And downtown's having, a resurgence. They're building it all back up. So I think anything with close proximity to Seattle, we're going to see trending. I'm seeing a lot just like in Federal Way and Linwood, just in the I-5 corridor, a lot of growth and a lot of opportunity. So that's kind of where we're at in as far as what we're seeing in trends. And then the other two scenarios I wanted to explain were when you have a primary and you move out of it and turn it into an investment. Do you have clients that do that pretty often or sometimes maybe? And so in that scenario, as long as the investment is on the back end and they're renting it out on the back end before they sell it, it qualifies. And what I like about that scenario is you can combine the 1031 exchange and the 121 exclusion. So you can really minimize capital gain liability if it was your primary that you turned into an investment. So I kind of just like to throw all these ideas out because again, we can look at a 2-year plan, a 5-year plan, or like a 20-year plan, and how all of this exchange dynamics plug into that. And, we sort of stay in our lane of 1031, but based on precedent and experience, we can offer sort of, suggestions, if you will. But I would really love any input or questions that you guys have. Also, I am available if you want me to come to your offices and do a presentation. If you have any investment groups, I can put flyers and packages together with information. And really, coming back to that, getting that one call a month where somebody was not informed potentially of maybe doing a 1031. I'd like to say it's as easy as if we all ask, is it an investment property? Would you like some information on a 1031? And that's all I would ask. Maybe you guys, if you could do that and hand them over to me, I'll take it from there. So I'm happy to always jump on a call with any clients. And, I think education and knowledge will add value. And what I'd like to see is that if we enter into a collaboration for a client on an exchange, that you guys all would get 2 transactions at least out of it. So that would be fantastic as well. And then lastly, this doesn't benefit you guys per se, but have you all heard of DSTs, Delaware Statutory Trusts? Okay. So I like to offer those in that same scenario. Someone sold for the million, they're buying for 800. What is going to happen to that 200? They don't want to make improvements. They don't want to do that scenario. Another scenario would be taking that additional 200, because typically you can't find a property anywhere around here for 200, maybe in another state or a piece of land. But if they're not interested in that, they can also take their proceeds, that extra amount, or their entire proceeds for that matter, of the sale of a property, and put it into a DST. And that's a Delaware Statutory Trust. And it's an opportunity for an investor to buy into an investment in an exchange where typically it's always been whole property. So this is where there's already sponsors, established portfolios. They present it to the client. The minimum buy-in, I think, is around 50. I also have some DST providers I can refer out. But, again, if you just can't get your client to the finish line of that $1 million, what you need to spend in proceeds, and they just don't want to pay taxes, this is where a DST might be beneficial to know about. So they can buy the $800,000 property and then maybe put 200 into a DST investment. So I've been handing out information on those a lot lately as well. And I don't have anything to do with selling them, but I do have several referrals I can give to clients that they can call and look into it. And like I said, some clients take $1 million and buy several DSTs, and some just take what we call boot, which is that 200 in this example I presented. That's called boot, and that would be subject to taxes if they didn't spend it. So that's another really relevant strategy right now. Hi.
Can they, if they just can't find a property that they want to do, can they take all of their proceeds and
Yes.
put it in the GST? Okay.
100%.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So, and like I said, I've got some really good providers. It's really kind of a loophole to the loophole, which is awesome, because I have clients all the time that are asking me, can I sell property A, take those proceeds and put them into my property B and pay that off? No. Can I buy into my friend's property? No. So that none of that does work in an exchange, but this is a way that they've created that you can buy into an investment in an exchange as well. So we're seeing a lot of activity there too.
Okay, I have one more question.
Sure.
So, the scenario is you have 2 related investors that buy an investment property. They form an LLC or something like that to buy it.
Sure.
Does that LLC make them disqualified for?
Great question again. Okay, so partnerships, LLCs are a little bit more tricky. So if you guys are, this is good knowledge too. When they enter into title, it's all based on how title is structured. So if it's a straight partnership, then so you asked me kind of 2 questions. So I'll start with the partnership question first. So if it's a straight partnership, then the partnership has to move into the replacement property together. They sell together, they have to go because of the taxpayer rule, the same taxpayer rule. Now, I'm having a lot of instances where they want to go their own separate ways. And so if they do want to do an exchange, it has to be together, or they have to change the structure of title prior to the exchange. It's called a drop then swap. And so one of them would drop out of the partnership. Now, in that scenario, though, because you're changing the structure on the front end, you're not having a seasoning period now for the new title, the way title's being held. So we don't recommend that unless they have the time to have a year or hopefully 2 for that new structure. So the best case in a partnership is to do then a swap, then drop. So they'd swap into the new property together and then change the structure of title down the road. So that is how partnerships work. Now, if they're tenants in common and they own a property together, they can take their interest earned and move on to an exchange independently of their tenant in common partner. But that's the difference. Partnerships, no. Tenants in common, yes. Now back to the LLC and LLCs, if they have their own EIN number and it's just one, but it's got multi membership, same sort of criteria. But if the LLC has its own EIN number, then the LLC has to be the new entity that owns title on the replacement property. So does that make sense? Okay. And, disregarded entities are spouses because we're in a community property state. So if one person's on title, but they're married, then theoretically both are on title and you can interchange that. So that if they're only one spouse is on title on the relinquished property, it doesn't matter. They can both be, or one can be on replacement. And then the second part of that question was about related parties, right? So in a 1031 exchange, you can, the relinquished property can be sold to someone that is related to you, but you cannot buy the replacement property from someone related to you. And related means, mother, daughter, sibling, like immediate family. So that's a great question. But yeah, whenever I hear partnership or related party on the replacement, I just go, oh no, because usually it doesn't work out. Those are immediate red flags to the IRS. So we just kind of don't even engage. Any other questions? I'm sure we're missing a couple things, but I feel like we've kind of covered more or less the basics and sort of what we're seeing in 2025. Does anybody else have any input? I hope that was beneficial for all of you. And I think really it's a matter of, once we dive into a client together, it'll all make more sense. If it doesn't, and then also I can definitely take over and be the expert if that's what you would want from me.
Okay, any other questions before I stop the recording? Okay, I'll go ahead and stop the recording.